Welcome to the Dark Ascent podcast, where we enter into the deepest secrets of black magic in the left-hand path. This is episode 16, Unveiling the Dark Gods, Part 2. To learn more about our work, please visit darkascent.org. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Hi everyone, welcome to our podcast. I am Melektoth, and I'm here as always with my wife Elinara.
Hi!
And this is part 2 of our, in my opinion, very interesting podcast from last week. So last week we started the Unveiling the Dark Gods series, I guess you could call it, 2-part series, where we started talking about exactly who the Dark Gods are, and specifically started talking about Satan / Lucifer, whatever you want to call him. And so if you haven't listened to that one, I recommend going and listening to that one first.
Yeah, you'll want to, because this is going to build off of it.
Yeah, this will definitely build off of that quite a bit. And so that was episode 15, so I suggest going to check that out, and that'll give you a good foundation for this one. So last week we talked about Satan, and I talked about how Satan corresponds to chaos. He corresponds to what we call Chachma on the Tree of Life. If you're not familiar with Kabbalah, that might mean nothing to you, but if you are, then it does. But basically, just to kind of summarize, Satan is the formlessness before everything. And so the reason he's chaos is simply that he comes before all creation, even before the all, even before the universe itself, even before any sense of separation. So it's total, absolute darkness. Not in like the evil way, obviously, but in the way of pure silence. Okay, so that it's a state that I think not a lot of people experience, but that silence before creation is what Satan represents, and that's chaos. And so now we're talking about the goddess, and we're giving her the name Babalon, and I'll explain why in a little while. And she is the other side of that coin. She's the second emanation from the void. I guess technically the third if you're going by Kabbalah, because it's Bina is the third sphere, but we'll just say the second. And she represents order. Now, she represents order because basically she takes the raw, unformed will from chaos, or Satan, and gives form to it.
Yeah, so it's a good kind of order.
Yeah, a good
or
kind
we
of order.
Wouldn't
well,
be here.
It actually can be either. It's interesting that way. But I'll talk about that in a second.
That's true. You have a point.
Yeah, order can be either good or bad, or, I mean, there's not really good or bad, but pleasant or unpleasant, I guess.
Yeah.
Helpful or harmful. But she takes that will and gives shape to it, and gives birth to the universe, basically. And so, the first manifestation of this, I'm going back to Hinduism again, I talked about Satan being Shiva, and in a similar vein, I believe Babalon is Shakti, or this general goddess form is Shakti. So I talked a little bit last week about Shiva and Shakti. They kind of come together in this dance of creation, and Shiva is the same sort of thing, the chaos, the darkness before everything, the witness to everything, and through his will, Shakti gives that form, and through the dance of creation, she creates the world. And so there are a lot of parallels there. Now, the thing about Shakti that I found quite interesting, I found this out quite a few years ago at this point, but the thing I found out about her is that she sort of has two sides, okay? Because, now, if you're familiar with Hinduism, you might know the term Maya. Maya just means basically illusion. Maya is that which keeps us stuck in the illusion of the world, thinking that things are what they seem to be when they're really not. The illusion of separation and that kind of thing. And Maya is actually really, from what I've heard, just kind of a face or an aspect of Shakti. So to me, so Babalon or Shakti or whatever you want to call her, the goddess, represents the light. And I talked about how darkness is actually the primary force of the universe, the primary essence of everything, because darkness comes before everything. Light is temporary. Light burns out. Light goes away. Light changes. And so we see this in Shakti. So, for me, light kind of has two possible expressions. The first one is the one people think of the most. The light is like the good, kind of like the light at the end of the tunnel, the light that guides you back to your, who you really are, or to God, or whatever you want to call it. It's that guiding light, right? So everyone talks about being the light and bringing the light to earth and blah, blah, blah.
And even in NDEs or near-death experiences, people always go to the light.
Go to the light, yeah. Right, so the light is that sort of guiding force, and that's definitely part of what the goddess does. The other thing that light does, though, is it creates illusions. Because how could you have any illusion without light? So a really good metaphor of that is like a film projector, so to speak, where you have, the screen, which is kind of like the formlessness of chaos or Satan. And they have the light that plays on the screen. And the light is what actually creates the images that you see. Let's say you're watching a movie or something. It's the light on the screen that creates those images. And from second to second, you have hundreds of frames every second flicking by faster than your eyes can possibly follow. And that creates the images that kind of sucks you in and makes you think it's real. I mean, obviously, it's not real, but I mean, if you've seen a movie, you know that you get sucked into it. You sort of believe on some level that it's a real thing. You sort of, you root for the hero. I mean, why would you do that if you didn't think any of it was real, right? But you're sort of emotionally sucked into it. And so it's an illusion, and it's that light that creates the images. All it is images. All it is, you're sitting in a theater watching a screen with a whole bunch of images made of light playing on the screen. It reminds me a lot of, I always mention the allegory of the cave, Plato's allegory of the cave.
That's your signature.
Where, the, I guess, captives or whatever you want to call them of the cave are just watching shadows on the wall. But what do shadows come from? It comes from light, right? Without light, you can't have shadows. So basically light playing on the wall in different shapes and different forms, and they believe that's real. So that's Maya. That is the illusion. It's our thoughts that create stories and beliefs and dreams and judgments and everything that keeps us stuck. But it can also be that which guides us out of the illusion. So the goddess, in that sense, sort of has a two-sided aspect, or two-sided, I don't want to say personality, but essence, where she can keep you stuck in the web of illusion, or she can guide you out towards your true self, your true essence. And so that I find in Shakti, which I find really interesting, but it's also in many of the other goddesses. But that's why light, again, light is not necessarily entirely, I don't want to say good, but it just depends on what you're doing with it. It just depends on a lot of things, but light can fool you, right? So I think that's really important, and that's what order is. Order can mean the order of, I've talked about like default reality, where you are basically agreeing to what other people want for you, or what the society wants for you, or the expectations put on you, they're seemingly put on you, beliefs that you hold or you take on over time. All this is order, so it's not only that. I mean, that's just one expression of it, one form of it, one possibility of it, but it's what a lot of people encounter, this order. And you sort of have to see through the order, see through the light show, so to speak, in order to see the true essence of who you are. And none of it is to, it's not like she's trying to make you suffer necessarily, because when you see through the light show, you can actually start to enjoy it, because it's not real. It's sort of like a movie. If you thought the movie was real and all this stuff was actually happening in front of you, you'd probably be kind of scared, right? It'd be not a super pleasant experience. But when you can come in and realize it's a movie and it's going to be over, and you can just sit back and sort of enjoy the show, then it's more enjoyable, and that's why people go to movies. But I mean, can you imagine like thinking the movie was actually real in some sense?
Oh my God,
like happening right now in front of you?
Sometimes, though, I feel like that, even in real life.
It's like, imagine a gun scene and you're like, what if I get shot? Like, it's just happening on a screen. It's not real, But that's sort of what we're like in the everyday, world is.
But we get scared too. Like, I think we forget that it's a movie or that it's like a movie.
Yeah.
And when things happen in life, we're like, oh my God,
Well, that's
so
my
scared.
point, is we are fooled by it. In a movie, we're not, because we know it's not real.
Right.
But in real life, we don't realize it's just light playing on the screen.
But part of me wants it to be real too, because it feels real.
It does. It feels very real.
Yeah.
That's the point, yeah. So, and that's the goddess's job, is to make all this feel very, very real. She gives birth to all of this. So, to me, your relationship with the light all depends on whether you can see through it or not, whether you can see through the illusion. If you can see through the illusion, then your relationship with the light starts to become more
playful,
more beneficial, and you see the beauty of it all. You're not threatened by anything. There is a wonderful sort of parable or story in Hinduism, and I'm just gonna really, really paraphrase it horribly. I've mentioned it before, I think, elsewhere, but anyway, if you are walking along and you see a snake on the ground, Elinara knows where I'm going.
Yeah.
And you get really freaked out because, what if it bites you, or if it's venomous or whatever. But you see that snake and suddenly you realize, hey, wait a second, that's not a snake, that's a rope. It's just a rope laying on the ground. And you've seen through the illusion of the snake, now you know it's a rope. You can never be scared by that rope again, because no matter how much it looks like a snake, you know it's just a rope.
But it could be a snake.
It's a rope. And the thing is that no matter how many other people come along and get scared by the apparent snake, you will never again get scared, because you know it's just a rope.
I really don't think ropes look like snakes.
She really does like to ruin my analogy. It's not even my analogy. I mean, take it up with the original author.
Maybe they do. I don't know.
I'm
blind.
Yeah, exactly. So just trust the person who came up with the metaphor, and trust that some ropes can look like snakes. I don't know. They're long and stringy. Not stringy, but
They do coil.
Yeah, well, anyway, this rope looks like a snake.
Okay.
It's a snaky rope.
Okay.
So no matter how many other people come by and believe in that snake and get scared by it, you know that it's not real. And so you will never, ever, ever again be scared by it. You might actually like it. You might, I don't want to stretch the analogy too far, but when you can see through an illusion, you might actually start to have fun with it, because it's not threatening. There's nothing in the world that's threatening. And so the whole thing is just a light show that you can enjoy. And actually with magic, I talked about in episode 14, the new paradigm of black magic, you can sort of manipulate I don't want to say in your favor, but to experience things you want to experience. But as you're creating those desires, that there's still nothing more than just a light show. But it's sort of like, well, would you like to see a movie about a superhero, or would you like to see a movie about, I don't know, dogs? Sorry, I have dogs on the brain because there's a movie coming out about dogs. Or, something completely different. Would you like to see a movie about zombies or something? No, thank you. I hate zombies.
Exorcisms. That's another.
Exorcisms. No, I don't like those either.
I know.
I'm not a horror movie person, weirdly enough.
I know. I'd expect you to be too.
I know. But, it's your choice what you want to watch that movie about. And so you can kind of determine that. And that's how the world becomes, how life becomes when you can see through the light show, is that you start to be able to choose what you want to experience. Not because any of it's threatening, but just because, well, this sounds slightly more interesting than that. And so I think, I'll head this way. And that's what really creation's all about. But that's sort of a topic for another day. But it just sort of shows you what's possible when you can really see through the light to the essence of what it really is. So the goddess's job, Shakti's job, Babalon's job, we'll get to her later, is to, number one, create the universe and make it look really convincing, because it's fun. It's out of playfulness. It's out of just why not. And number two, to provide that light that leads you back to your source, to darkness. And darkness is the source, or really that which is beyond light and dark. But I think darkness is kind of the closest you can possibly get with words. So, and that, with the guiding light sort of analogy, my experience over the years has been that life really does attempt to guide us. Every little thing that happens, I think, has meaning. And things happen all the time that sort of force you to question your beliefs, your preconceived notions. It forces you to really look at yourself and see if what you believed is really true, things like that. So life, I used to have the saying a few years ago, I would say that life is the best teacher.
Yeah.
Because it always shows you what you need to see next to get to the next level. And so that's sort of the guiding light motif. And that's also the goddess. And now the goddess is also love. And so, I've talked about will. So Satan is will, because it's unformed will, raw will. And the goddess is love. And love because, she's about surrender and effortlessness and spirituality and all that kind of stuff. And there are certainly other aspects that I'll mention soon. But love, unconditional love, is what the goddess represents in all her forms. And love can be a challenging thing because it's not like just romantic love where it just feels good all the time, kind of warm and fuzzy love.
Mm-hmm.
It's unconditional love as in everything is perfect, even if I don't want it to be. Even if it doesn't seem like it to me, but it is. Unconditional love is sort of at the heart of everything.
And it's a choice.
It's a choice, yeah. So, the goddess represents love. So that's, I talked about Shakti a bit. One of the other big manifestations I worked with for a brief time was Sophia. And I won't talk about this too long because I didn't study her for that long, and there are some connections, but it's not really that important, I don't think, and not a lot of people are familiar with her. Sophia is sort of the goddess of wisdom, and she is, in the Gnostic tradition. So, I mentioned this last week, there's like the Christian Gnostics, and it comes from Greek culture, but there are Christian and non-Christian Gnostics. But Sophia is one of their major figures. And Sophia is sort of a dark goddess because she created the world against the advice, against the guidance of God, and the other, they're not really angels, but I don't remember the name for them in Gnosticism. Pleroma or something?
You mean the Archons?
No, the Archons are the bad ones.
Yes, I don't know what angels are called.
Anyway, they're like Pleroma, I think. But anyway, against the advice of God or, whoever was above her, she created something apart from her realm of light. And it became the material world. And Gnostics kind of think it's all evil and that kind of stuff. But there are some who think, that she really gave of herself to create this world. And so they kind of see her as Mother Earth and that kind of thing, and as sort of a world soul. World soul is sort of like the soul or the being that holds the world together, that flows through everything in the world.
So she, in essence, is the world.
She is the world, yeah. Sort of a universe sort of idea, like a pantheistic.
That's really cool. So really we're her.
Yeah, we're within her essence.
Right. Huh.
So a lot of Gnostics see her in that sense. And, a lot of these goddesses are dark goddesses. I mean, even Shakti, in a sense, in my eyes, see, especially because she creates illusion. She created the world as illusion, which is false. Sophia created the world against the guidance of God, and so the world is false and supposed to be evil, which it's really not. But she did that even though she wasn't supposed to, and so she's sort of a dark goddess. So even though the goddess represents light, there's a lot of crossover where she's really a dark goddess to me, because, and she has other representations too, like the Great Mother, which I'll get to, and things like that. But she's also kind of a dark goddess because she created the world, she gives birth to everything, but the world is sort of supposed to be false, it's illusion and all that kind of stuff. So in a sense, it's also dark, right? And it reminds me of the yin yang symbol a little bit, because the goddess is dark, even though she's light, she has darkness in her. And Satan is dark, but also sort of has light because of Lucifer, who's the light bringer, right? So it's sort of this crossover, which I find really interesting.
So this is kind of interesting because actually, I don't know if I'm jumping the gun here.
It's okay.
But when you talk about, you'll be talking about Babalon soon.
Yeah.
But there's something called the Gnostic Catholic Mass.
Mm-hmm.
And in that, there are white and black candles.
Oh.
Yeah. I can't remember exactly the symbolism or where they are, but they have white and black candles opposite each other, I think. Don't take my word for it, you can look it up. But
right.
it was just interesting that they represent both the light and the dark at this service.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that.
I didn't know if I should say that now, though.
No, that's cool. Yeah, that's
Okay.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think, both light and dark, I think they do sort of dance with one another.
Yeah, they do.
In a really interesting way. And they kind of both contain one another.
Yeah.
So I think that's fascinating.
And they even, at the beginning of the service, I think it's the goddess, does this serpentine motion around the altar to symbolize Kundalini.
Oh, that is so cool.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
That's why I said you got to read what I
will.
What I told you to. 'Cause it's not the thing I sent you, the other thing.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. But it's so cool because it's like all of these things are being they're like different but the same in all these different cultures.
Right.
And it's fascinating because you can be whatever religion you choose and it's there somewhere.
It's still there.
It's just, and growing up in a very Catholic household, you don't know this stuff.
Right, yeah.
Okay? Like,
right.
I always say I feel like I grew up in a cult because, I didn't, all of this stuff was, hidden from me.
Yeah.
Not by anyone's fault, but it's what happened.
Right.
But now I'm like, what happened?
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, it is everywhere. I mean,
it is.
Even a little bit in Christianity, but not nearly as much.
No.
They've really suppressed it.
But it's there, though.
But it's there.
At least there, even a little bit.
We'll look at, Mary Magdalene, who isn't really seen with that much favor, but there are those who suspect that maybe, she actually was partnered with Jesus, and, so maybe being sort of a powerful feminine icon, the church really looked down on her.
Well, even Mother Mary,
Yeah, but she's sort of, everything that the church thinks women should be. And heck, she's a perpetual virgin.
Yeah, that's true.
She is, supposed to be all good and sinless and holy. And Babalon is everything opposite of the Virgin Mary. So I'm going to talk about Babalon now.
I guess I led into that then.
Yeah, so that's perfect. So Babalon comes from the Bible, so I'm going to read from the New International Version. It's not as graphic as some of the other ones.
Oh, come on. You should let me read them.
That's okay, I'll read this.
Well, I can't. It's not in front of me.
Yeah, so this is from Revelation chapter 17, just right in the beginning of it. And let me see. One of the 7 angels who had the 7 bulls came and said to me, "Come, I will show you the punishment of the great prostitute who sits by many waters. With her, the kings of the earth committed adultery, and the inhabitants of the earth were intoxicated with the wine of her adulteries." So, and it goes on and on and on from there. Those are the first 2 verses.
So that would be Babalon.
That's Babalon. And, it goes on to say that she's Babalon.
See, and when I tune into her, that's not what I mean, I know she is, but you could sense the evil spin on it. Yeah, so she, obviously not so favorable, in the Bible. But, she is what, the symbol that this is taken from. So, I mean, her history is kind of interesting, and, obviously she represents a lot of the things Christianity doesn't like. And I just want to say I'm not going to read the whole, beginning part of the chapter, but it does go on and identify her as Babalon. So anyway, but that, was kind of where she came in. Now, there are hints that I've heard that, she was sort of mentioned, not by name, but in the Old Testament in certain forms. And there are sort of suppositions that she originally came from the goddess Ishtar and some of the other related goddesses of other cultures. And that the Jews sort of demonized her and made her this evil, goddess or this evil being and whatnot. So, it's interesting. Now, we didn't know it was her at first. There was, years and years, centuries later, back, probably about 400 years ago, there were 2 occultists who, D and Kelly. I don't remember that's his last name, his first name. I thought it was
Edward Kelly. I know it's John D and Edward Kelly, I think it is.
Oh.
Anyway, they took on this working where, they worked with angels. They were totally white magic, Christian sort of thing. They worked with these angels, and I don't even know what their original goal was. But what ended up happening is they created the Enochian system of magic, and it comes with the whole like secret language and all this kind of stuff. But one of the things that happened toward the end of this whole experience for them is that this figure who named herself the Daughter of Fortitude came to them, and she was, despite the name, she was like half naked, and she was speaking pretty graphically about different things.
Oh gosh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I mean, she was, her whole upper body was bare, and she, like I said, came half naked. And so, interesting imagery. But the interesting thing is that the words, the imagery and the wording she used was really similar to wording that was in one of the Gnostic texts, from early, 2nd, 3rd century, called Thunder Perfect Mind was the text, which described Sophia.
And it wasn't discovered until...
Right, so, and the thing, they couldn't have gone by this text because this text wasn't discovered until the 20th century. So they had no access to it. But yet this being, the Daughter of Fortitude, used wording and imagery strikingly similar to, that of Sophia in that book, in that text. And so there is definitely a strong connection between, Babalon and Sophia for that reason. But, so Babalon, this is where all that comes from. And she, it's suspected she was the one that identified herself as the Daughter of Fortitude. But Aleister Crowley was the one who sort of made her into a goddess of Thelema. And so she's recognized now there primarily, but I mean, there are other people outside of Thelema that work with her as well. But I want to say, when I'm speaking of Babalon in this context, usually it's spelled Babylon, because the kingdom of Babylon in the Old Testament is mentioned a lot. But Crowley sort of spelled it as Babalon. Now, he did a lot of stuff like that. He's spelled magic differently to differentiate it from stage magic. He spelled Babalon differently for a couple different reasons. He wanted it to add, he was really big into gematria, where everything has to add up to a certain number, and whatever number it adds up to means certain things. And he wanted her name to add up to 156 for whatever, I don't remember the reason right now, to represent certain things. And so he just had to change the Y to an A, and it did that. But the other reason was that Babalon and Enochian apparently means, I think, wicked or wickedness. And so, being kind of a dark goddess, that was sort of appropriate. So when I'm speaking of her now, I'm speaking of her in this new context with a new spelling. And it seems minor, but I think it's important. So Babalon, it was hard for me to really open up to her. I mean, Sophia I was on board with. She seemed pretty cool. Babalon is a challenge for me.
Still?
Yeah, it's getting there. But a challenge for me because she's very, look at the source. She's very sexualized.
That's what makes her awesome.
And it's just, not my thing in general. And so it's weird.
Yeah.
And she's extremely sexualized. And, with her imagery and things like that, even in the Book of Revelation, great prostitute she's called. She's kind of called a little more colorful terms in the King James Version.
The whore of Babylon.
Thank you.
Melektoth can't say that word.
I just don't like it. I just think really a strong word. Anyway, so she, is called by some colorful words, and she is very sexualized, and...
I kind of think it's an attractive name.
So,
whore of Babylon.
Of course you do.
I don't know.
So, that's just... It's a difficult thing for me. Now, the interesting thing is, Shakti is also very sexualized. Not in the same ways, not in a denigrating way like Babalon was in Revelations. But Shakti, first of all, Tantra comes from Hinduism.
That's true.
And almost all of, of Hinduism is about, not all of it, but people who believe in Shiva and Shakti is about the merging of the two in figurative and sometimes quite physical forms. In fact, in Hinduism, a big thing is the Shiva is represented by what they call the lingam, and Shakti is represented by the yoni.
The what?
The male and female parts.
Oh, the way you said it, and
yeah, well, that's what they're called, and it's the Sanskrit terms.
Oh,
and so people literally will worship the lingam in like a form of that represents Shiva. and the yoni is what represents Shakti. So it's a very sexualized sort of imagery. And also kind of what you were saying about serpentine and kundalini. Kundalini is a Hindu thing, and I find it interesting the serpentine thing sort of bringing in the satanic imagery for me anyway.
Yeah, I know, right?
But kundalini is basically, sitting in the first chakra as it does, is basically nothing but sexual energy that is risen through the chakra system to the crown to meet with Shiva, and it's a spiritual merging. So it's sort of, again, a very sexual imagery, but it's also about sort of transcending or transmuting the sexual energy, which is a big thing in Hinduism, from the baser form to a higher form. So that's a
you
big
were
thing
saying that it goes from the spine through.
Yeah, and I was just continuing that. It goes, from the base chakra to the crown. And so it's about transmuting the sexual energy to a higher form. So that's, Shakti is all about that. And then she comes up and merges with Shiva. And that's a very sexualized sort of symbolism. And so, Babalon holding that same imagery, I don't know, just the whole thing is so parallel.
Yeah.
And Sophia, you'd have to read, Thunder Perfect Mind. She has sort of very similar wording she uses about herself in that text, like I said. And so, a lot of mysticism and spirituality becomes very sexualized after a while, because it's like the merging of the lover with the beloved and this kind of thing. And a lot of ecstatic poetry, will talk about that in sometimes quite graphic terms. That's very common. And so it's not that unusual for you to see that. So, Babalon has been a tough sort of goddess for me to work with, but, she also represents love. And the reason, she's sort of represented by, like in Revelations, like, a prostitute, the great prostitute she's called, is because, as unconditional love, she doesn't deny anyone, so she's sort of open to everyone. And so,
Don't get any ideas, women.
So,
I'm just kidding.
She's sort of open to everyone. And in that sense, that's what she's called. But it's that unconditional love sort of idea. So I'm going to read, she's mentioned in what's called the Gnostic Creed, which is from the Gnostic Catholic Church, has nothing to do with the Catholic Church. It's
from the same service that I mentioned.
Yeah, so it's from, this church is like basically, they are associated with the OTO, which is a magical order, and they're associated with Thelema. So in their creed, I'm just going to read the first two paragraphs because it mentions chaos, which we've already established chaos is Satan. They don't believe that, but I do. And then the second paragraph mentions Babalon, and it does mention her by name because they do believe in her. So creed starts out with this. I believe in one secret and ineffable Lord, and in one star in the company of stars, of whose fire we are created and to which we shall return, and in one Father of life, mystery of mystery, in his name Chaos, the sole vice-regent of the sun upon the earth, and in one air, the nourisher of all that breathes. And I believe in one earth, the mother of us all, and in one womb wherein all men are begotten, and wherein they shall rest, mystery of mystery, in her name Babalon. So that's the first two parts of the Gnostic Creed, which I think is really beautiful. So, there you see she's the great mother that all people are begotten from. And there's a lot of mother imagery, Mother Earth, sort of the world soul, same kind of thing as Sophia. And so, it shows her different aspects really well. And that kind of aspect I'm really attracted to. I think that's really, really fascinating.
Yeah.
So she resonates with me a lot with that kind of aspect. But, mentioning her as, again, that which begets all, there's an interesting sort of mythology around this that is in Thelema. And I find it a really good parallel to what we're talking about with non-duality and awareness and beingness and what, in the void and whatnot, light and dark. Because so the way it goes, I mentioned the Tree of Life, and with a lot of the occult, the great work, which is kind of the word we use in Thelema to represent the purpose, why we're here, what we're doing, not just like I'm here to do this or that, but I'm here to actually learn who I actually am, my true nature, and become one with the all. That's the great work. And so the great work as you realize more of who you are, and as you come into contact with that, there's, on the tree of life, there's an abyss that separates the first 3 spheres, which represents the void, and then Satan/chaos, and Babylon/order. And the rest of the remaining 7 spheres, which is the rest of creation. Okay, all other manifestations below the abyss. And to cross the abyss, which means to unite with yourself, with who you really are, to become that awareness, to annihilate the ego, requires just that. It requires letting go of all that you thought you were. It requires letting go of all your false selves and annihilating the ego. And so the mythology in Thelema goes that when you cross the abyss and you drop every shred of ego, you are sort of brought as like a baby in the womb of Babalon. And, impregnated by actually Pan is the imagery they use, but, horned god imagery, Satan.
It's the same thing.
Kind of thing. And she gives birth to you into what they call the City of Pyramids, which is where all the adepts, all the masters are located.
Oh, that's so cool.
And so, when you annihilate yourself, the imagery is that your blood goes into her grail, into her cup, because there's this imagery in Revelations where she, is drunk on the blood of the saints and whatnot. So it's sort of this sort of same thing, but in a positive way, where you cross the abyss, you annihilate the self, your metaphorical blood goes into her grail, into her cup, and then you're born of her as a new sort of self beyond the abyss.
How did Crowley come up with that?
I have no idea.
It's just like creepily accurate, I feel like.
Mm-hmm. So this is the guiding light imagery. She guides you back to shed your false self and become who you really are. And so in a sense, you're born of her, or of the merger of light and dark, Babalon and Pan sort of thing, and born into the City of Pyramids. And I just find it a really compelling imagery for really what we're doing, which is, again, the great work, which is just becoming who you really are, right? And so she does, that's a very light-based role that she plays, and so that's also why she's love, because when you give up everything, what you become is love, and you're sort of born of love in a sense. So I find that really interesting, just myself. But it's that merging of light and dark.
Yeah.
And I think when those come together, that's when you really have the fulfillment of who you're meant to be, or, the rediscovery of yourself. And then even as the light, then you drop that and become the awareness, the darkness that you are. So you can even go beyond the light. And that's where Satan comes in. But, and he, and there's a little blurb in Liber Semek, which is, I could be butchering the pronunciation, a ritual Crowley came up with. And in the evocation of, I believe, fire, perhaps, I don't remember, Satan is said to be silence. And silence, I mentioned that earlier, is like before all creation. That sacred silence, that's before everything. And so that's, even Crowley mentions Satan in that context. So I find that really fascinating as well. So that's what it all comes to, this interaction. Obviously the dance of the goddess also creates illusion, but she can also guide you back to herself and to the darkness as well, to become who you really are, to rediscover who you are beneath everything. So that is really where it all goes to, or where it all ends up. I'm going to read another little text a quote that I found about Babalon. It's from a book, I think it's called Mystery of Mystery. You saw that referred to several times in the Creed, by authors Sabazius and Helena. Again, I could be butchering their pronunciation, I'm sorry. So I'll read this quote quickly. Babalon, as the Great Mother, represents matter, a word which is derived from the Latin word for mother. She is the physical mother of each of us, the one who provided us with material flesh to clothe our naked spirits. She is the archetypal mother, the great yoni, the womb of all that lives through the flowing of blood. She is the great sea, the divine blood itself, which cloaks the world and which courses through our veins. And she is Mother Earth, the womb of all life that we know. So again, Great Mother, imagery, and you heard Yoni in there. Same thing as with Shakti. And so, same sort of thing with that is that, Mother Earth and the mother of everything and the Great Sea. Now, the Great Sea is another name for Bina. Bina on the Tree of Life, that's the third sphere I mentioned. The Great Sea, that's sort of another name for it. So she's the Great Sea and the Great Mother. She's also called the Mother of Abominations.
I love it. That's awesome.
The darkness aspect coming in. But, those are all aspects of her. So, and what I found interesting, it said matter derives from a Latin word for mother.
I know.
And so you do have, again, with the light and the dark, the light is what creates matter, is where matter comes from, is where manifestation comes from, which is why it's illusory and can be not so helpful sometimes. But matter and spirit, which is light and dark, or form and formlessness, Satan is the formless, also the force of will behind the form of light. And that's how things happen. Now, I mentioned about will. So in our own experience, you can find these components. I think we're speaking on a very high level, which a lot of people might think, okay, why should I care about some random goddesses and whatnot? But this is in our everyday, well, maybe not every day, but in our own experience that we can have. So just starting with the light, again, is all of our thoughts. It's our own consciousness. It's the stories that we tell about the world. It's the way we interact with life. Light is what makes us believe anything. Okay, so that's the more illusory way. As the guiding light, it's sort of that awareness of sort of what we should be doing or what direction we need to take, or, what really shows us the truth of things. We have this understanding. Understanding is a word for Bina, is what Bina actually means. And so that's the light. The darkness is this will, is this chaos, and it's not as much in our day-to-day experience, but it can be. So the darkness, first of all, is will. So someone might ask, beyond all creation, how can there be will? How can there be a universal will? And the way I see that, and the way I think we can experience it, not a lot of people do, but the way you can experience it, is when you enter, actually this is a perfect metaphor for me, when you enter the place of effortlessness, you give up the false self of ego, and you enter into effortlessness. Effortlessness is your direct path to the goddess, to Babalon. And by the way, before I even go there, that effortlessness, that love that you fall into as your natural state, that to me is the manifestation of the goddess. So that's, in her more helpful form.
Right.
So as the mind, as thought, that's not so helpful. That's Maya, the illusion, that kind of thing, the dance of the goddess in creation. But then as you fall into love, as you fall into effortlessness, that's her form as unconditional love, as the guardian of the abyss, she's called, that which is beyond all ego. And when you are in the effortlessness, when you are in that place of love, then what you find is that there is an intelligence to life. And you find yourself being inspired to certain things that you don't even question, you just do them. Have you ever sort of been maybe going along your day and not really thinking too much, and you just find yourself doing something, you're not even sure why you did it?
Yep, all the time.
And you just do. And it almost always results in something good.
Oh, yeah.
You sort of just get inspired to an action, and it goes so far beyond mind that you don't even think about it. So that is the universal will. That's Satan, chaos. Okay? And again, with this sort of dark imagery, we can think like, okay, why Satan? Well, that will, as I sort of alluded to last week, can be very counterintuitive. It's like the person who goes against all common wisdom and does something completely different, but then it pays off for them.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I gave maybe I don't remember. I talked about Lester Levinson in the past and how, he made $1 million because he felt like it. And then he just got this urge to move from New York to Sedona, Arizona. And he did. He left everything behind. And, common wisdom would say like, okay, at least sell some stuff, bring some money. Why would you just leave everything behind? But the universal will, I could go so far as to say Satan, was telling him, leave it all behind. Just move. You'll be taken care of. It'll all work out. And because he was united in that sense with love, he even says love is the highest thing. So united with the goddess in that, that will could just flow through him. And he moved without questioning it. And everything worked out. The money showed up. He bought some property. He lived there for years and years and years. That is what I mean by universal will. There's an intelligence. And even if you take no action, life itself just works everything out for you when you're in the place of love. Okay? When you're beyond illusion, when you're beyond ego and mind and all that kind of stuff, when you're just in the place of love and effortlessness, there's a will, an intelligence that shows itself, that does everything in its power to make you happy, which is the beautiful and amazing thing with all of this, is that when you can really become that love, become that effortlessness, then the universe or will or Satan seems to do everything in its power to make you happy. I've found that to be true when I've really let go. I've had times when I didn't know how money would show up, or, you know, if it would show up, and I needed it to show up to pay a bill or something. And then it did, because over the years, I learned that everything would work out. So I started just to trust. And that universal will would show up and make sure that things aligned in just such a way for me that I got what I needed. So I see life as this beautiful interplay between, you know, God and goddess, between Satan and Babalon, between dark and light. And when you can merge with that interplay, with that dance, then your life becomes beautiful. When you go against it, so that dance of creation between the masculine and feminine, the dark and the light, to me is what the Tao is about in the Tao Te Ching and Taoism and so on. Because it does have both a light and a dark aspect. I'll talk about that in my upcoming course. But when you go against it, you know, when you try to use your own will, and this is a hard thing. When I say your own will, that doesn't mean you can't have your own goals, okay? You know, when you become that which is greater than all of it, which is truly who you are, then your own will instantly becomes manifest because you're sort of united with the universal will. But when you don't know who you are, when you're not merged with that divine interplay of male and female, of God and goddess, then your smaller will, your egoic will, which is stuck in the realm of illusions, has literally no power. So when, you know, a black magician, for example, and this is why I talked about in episode 14, the new paradigm of black magic. In the old paradigm of black magic, when a magician tries to do a spell to get something willfully and it doesn't work, it's because they're acting from ego. They're not acting with Satan, so to speak, or with Babalon. They're acting against the Tao, the whole thing, the divine interplay. They are trying, and there's a whole thing about black magic being this antinomian thing of going against, but that's only going against the illusion of the world, not going against the universe.
Yeah.
You know, we're not trying to do that, because going against the universe is spiritual suicide. It's torture. It's horrible. That's what we all sort of do. The ego believes that everything is a threat. And so everything the ego does is not out of love. It's out of, you could say, hatred. It's out of fear. It's out of everything negative. That's not what I mean by black magic at all. That is stupidity. Okay, but real black magic, or whatever you want to call it, real darkness, is merging with the goddess, surrendering, using your own will, because you're also merged with the god, or you could say Satan or whatever, so you don't say, I surrender and give up my will. That's not what you're saying. You're saying, I surrender to love, and then as the divine darkness, he's called the father of life, as that, you say, yeah, I'd like to have this thing. I'd like to manifest this thing. And it just happens. It just happens because you're not in illusion. It's sort of like what I talked about with deciding what movie you'd like to see. It's not this big life or death situation like, I need to see this one movie because otherwise I'll die. That's sort of what we're doing every day. It's more like, yeah, this sounds fun. Let's go do this. And so you do. And that's the interplay of will and love. And so you become a co-creative partner with this divine dance of the masculine and the feminine, the dark and the light, Satan and Babalon. And so your life becomes absolutely perfected in love, in will, in every way. It becomes absolutely perfected in the ways that you want, not just, whatever God's will is. That's weakness. So that to me is the vision of what can be. I was debating whether to read this. There's a short little blog post that I found. I'll link to this. And it's just called Thoughts on Chaos. But it talks about chaos and the goddess. And the goddess is nameless in this description, but it clearly refers to Babalon. But it's so interesting because it verifies and validates everything I've pretty much said today. So here's what this little quote says. The reason that Chokmah is called chaos is because it represents that aspect of the divine that is formless and never changes. He consorts with the goddess, his opposite. She is form and change, which is illusion. He is the formless, unchanging axle around which the goddess does her maypole dance of form and change, creation and destruction. The goddess is, herself, illusion. She is the fantasy of chaos. This is the way that there can be two, and in reality, only one. So, I really like that.
Wow, that last part.
Right? Yeah. And the reason I really, really like it, number one, the dance, the maypole dance she does around the god.
Yeah.
But also, in the Tao Te Ching, it talks about the wheel in that last part. The wheel and the Tao Te Ching talks about we use both being and non-being, i.e. light and dark. Mm-hmm. And non-being is that hub of the wheel, that center hole around which the wheel rotates. The whole of the wheel. And the interesting thing is that, in Thelema, there are the two major gods and goddesses, Harit and Nuit. Nuit is like the star goddess. She is like the sky and the stars and the night sky and that kind of thing. And, her body makes up the night sky. But her secret name is Babalon. And Harit, well, first of all, Babalon or Nuit is represented by like the circle or, the wheel that rotates, and the circle that is infinite, the expansion of that circle. But Harit, which Crowley also identifies with Satan, by the way, is the center, the dense core of everything that's inside of everything, in every star, in every person, and everything. That is their true awareness. That is their true nature. And so that hub of the wheel, that hole in the middle of the wheel, around which the wheel rotates, but really which holds the whole thing together, because the Tao Te Ching says, what is a wheel without its center? Mm-hmm. It would fall apart. It wouldn't work.
You need it.
You need it. So that whole, that center is the same thing as the Hadid, which is the point. So like Nuit is the circle, Hadid is the point. And, Babalon is the expansiveness, the expansion, the infinite. And Satan or chaos or Hadid is the infinite point of, beyond creation, of just awareness. And so just such a beautiful imagery that dance together where they depend on one another. But that to me is the interplay of Satan and Babalon. And it's such a weird thing for me because, Satan sounds like scary and dark. Well, he is dark. But really, why would we use him? But I think he's the perfect one to be used for that role. And there's so many connections that verify and validate it, that he's the best one to use. Like I said last week, you can use Shiva and Shakti, you can use whatever you want to. There are so many male-female pairs in every religion, but for me, this is perfect because it really is that awareness, that knowingness that sort of goes against the illusion of the world. And so Satan, who is he Satan to? He's not Satan to the spiritual, like the adversary. He's the adversary to the illusion. True. He destroys the illusion, just like Shiva destroys our illusion or the world itself. And that's so, to someone like the church who's afraid of losing control or afraid of people really knowing what's true, yeah, he's Satan. He's the adversary.
Yep.
To us, he's not an adversary. He might be an adversary to our ego.
That's a good thing, though,
That's
right?
a good thing. It's a really good thing. So he's an adversary to our ego, but to us, he's not really an adversary. He's what kind of, in a sense, we really are. So Again, I could talk about this forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. But hopefully that does make sense. And that interplay, that divine dance, to me is just such a almost painfully beautiful imagery.
Yeah.
And I cannot overemphasize that when you align yourself with this divine dance between the dark and the light, your life becomes perfect. It becomes perfected. I've long said that life is self-healing, self-correcting. When you stop resisting that which you are, when you stop resisting that divine dance, you become perfect. Everything gets better. All problems dissolve. And by the way, all of life is the divine dance. It's just a manifestation of it. And the degree that that dance is beautiful to you is reflected by how much you resist life. When you resist life, the dance is chaotic and angry and crazy and painful. But when you embrace life, and this is almost a whole different topic that we can get into maybe near future, when you embrace life, which is the result of the divine dance, then you become a partner in it. You become united with them. And the whole dance becomes beautiful, not only in just your perception, but then life corrects itself to give you everything you could possibly want. So it's not just, I hate my job. Oh no, it's actually okay. I love my job, even though before I hated it. Nothing actually changed on the outside, so I'm just fooling myself. No, you love everything, and then everything changes to match your love. So again, that's sort of, I won't get carried away, I promise. It's my passion. That's it. That's what it all is.
And it's not a superficial, like Melektoth said.
Yeah.
It's really a choice, really, to love everything, You're
really
not going to feel warm and fuzzy all the time.
No.
I love this so much. It's so warm and fuzzy, blah, blah. No.
Right.
No. It's okay. This is how life is. And, and I love it because it's not serious.
I love it because love is, everything is love. So you cannot be conditional with your love.
No.
That's just, again, that opens up a whole nother can of worms. And we won't go there right now. But just take my word for it. When you do embrace all of life, when you do surrender to the divine dance, everything becomes beautiful because everything becomes love. Everything becomes perfect in your life. So that, to me, if you want black magic, it's not scary, it's not evil, it's not dramatic, it's not showy, it's not ritualistic, but it's beautiful and it's amazing, and it's the highest of what you can possibly become. And it's the merging of the light and the dark, and the male and the female and everything else. It's the merging and the perfection of everything that you are. So that is it. So, with that said, I hope you enjoyed that.
This was a lot of fun.
That was a lot of fun. And, if you would like, I'm going to be talking a little bit more about this stuff in the Circle of Darkness pretty soon. I always talk about this stuff. So, if you'd like to join the Circle of Darkness, which is our monthly print newsletter, you can go to darkascent.org/circle and check it out there. So we thank you for listening. If you want to see the show notes and leave a comment for us, we'd appreciate that. You can go to darkascent.org/DA016 to leave a comment there. And also feel free to subscribe to us on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts, and we'd appreciate that. And we're here, every week, every Friday. No idea what next Fridays will be, but you'll see then, I guess.
So will we.
I don't know how we'll beat this one.
I know.
But we'll just end it here. We'll just give up. No, just kidding. So yeah, that's it. But we really appreciate you making it to the end. If you have questions, feel free to ask. But otherwise, we will see you next week for another episode of the Dark Ascent podcast. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Love is the law. Love under will.